Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're based. Today with us, we have an exceptional individual, one of those individuals that has been awarded through international organizations, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate with more than 25 years at the highest level of government, the United Nations, and global think tanks. That person is Mohammed Lameen Abdul-Malik. He will be joining us shortly. I'll give a little bit of a background once he joins. Lameen, thank you so much for joining. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest is someone who proves that leadership isn't about titles, it's mostly about impact. And today with us, we have Lameen Abdul-Malik, who's a Nobel Peace Prize laureate with more than 25 years at the highest level of government, the UN, and global think tanks. Lameen has helped establish Zambia's first cancer hospital, giving hope to over 1,500 patients a year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lameen.
That's correct.
He crafted strategies that brought nuclear science and technology into Africa's development agenda and launched a first of its kind infectious disease index that gave governments critical foresights long before pandemics dominated headlines. Lameen has written on deep tech, green hydrogen, future sustainable economies, and today he works with key consultancies and continues to push ideas that aim to transform not just companies but societies with the hope that he impacts over 1 billion lives. And surely as hell that I am one of those. So just want to welcome you, Lameen, on board, and I want to pass the floor directly to you.
Thanks, Alex, for inviting me to your podcast. Looking forward to having a great conversation this afternoon.
Great. Lameen, I want to start with the Nobel Peace Prize and the connection there. My genuine first question is: you're one of the few people in the world who can say they ran a cafe as a Nobel Peace laureate.
That's right.
How did the recognition change the opportunities you were offered and the expectations people had of you?
I think first of all, just maybe to reiterate, so in 2005, my colleagues and I at the International Atomic Energy Agency were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for basically the safe uses of nuclear science and technology. So not many people know this, but you can use the technology for fighting cancer, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. And also you can use it for developing new crops, and it's not a GMO crop type of variety. It's basically leveraging whatever exists in the soil and the environment to make crops to be a little bit more, to be more nutritious, to be more drought tolerant, for example, and high yielding. Those are the three main factors we're looking at using what we call plant breeding and plant breeding techniques to basically develop new crops. You can also use it for monitoring groundwater resources. You can use it for industry as well. Of course, you can use it for energy, which a lot of people know about nuclear science and technology for energy, and a host of other things, research into different types of things. So the idea was basically, we awarded that prize for leveraging nuclear science and technology to promote peace and development across the world. I primarily worked in Africa, so for about 15 years. And before I left, for the last 2.5 years of my tenure, I was actually appointed the regional program manager for Africa. So I think you mentioned earlier on about working with African countries. Back then, it was about 41 African countries to develop a 5-year strategy for them on how they can use mainly 2 areas we focused on to create food security and also looking at fighting cancer, ensuring also that they had the safe regulatory infrastructure within their countries to fight, to address food security and fight cancer. Fast forward that, so my first tenure at the IAEA was actually for 7 years. So the IAEA has this rule where professionals after 7 years have to leave. So I actually left in 2009. And in 2005, I started thinking about what I'm going to do in the future. And I've been very passionate about food for many, many years. And in 2005, I started getting into coffee. Went on a holiday trip with my family to Italy. My cousin is married to an Italian, and introduced me to the mocha pot. And I thought, oh, coffee can taste differently. So I just went this 5-year hole of learning a lot about coffee, reading books. Back then, this is way before YouTube. Well, YouTube 2005, there wasn't that much on YouTube back then. So everything was basically through books. So buying books, went to a few international conferences. Back then in London, met a lot of experts, and just learned a lot about coffee. Then launched my website from coffeewithlove.com in 2007. And at the end of 2009, when I left the IAEA, I thought to myself, what would I love to do? I thought, I would love to open up a coffee shop. So managed to convince my wife, very patient, to move to Cape Town. We didn't know anybody there. I just wanted to be in a different part of the world, give my children also a different experience in a different part of the world, and of course my wife and I as well. And we moved to Cape Town. And one of the first lessons, I was a little bit naive, I admit that, was like, okay, I've got great coffee, everything is on point, international standards, everybody's going to come. This concept of build it and they will come, I think is a little bit false. And then one day, after obviously struggling in the cafe, my wife said, oh, why don't you tell everybody you got a Nobel Peace Prize? I was like, well, why would I want to do that? I just want people to come and taste great coffee. She could just tell them anything to bring people in. So I always tell people one of my first business lessons is called listen to your wife. And the idea is I listened to my wife, and basically, my Nobel Peace Prize certificate, actually, which was given to all the staff members of IAEA, was, somewhere in the, I'll be honest with you, was like somewhere in the cupboard. I didn't even frame it. And I remember taking it to be framed, and I went to this, picture shop, and the guy looked at it and he said, oh my God, this is the most important thing I've ever framed in my life. I didn't even think that much about it, because this is a Nobel Peace Prize certificate. And I said, yeah. So I put that up in the coffee shop. Then I had a placard in the coffee shop that said one of us won a Nobel Peace Prize. And everybody was like, who is that? And I said, well, I did. And I said, where's the certificate? I said, it's behind you. And from then on, together with a really famous cheesecake, we broke even in 11 months. So the idea is, listen to your wife, or listen to people who are also not in the same industry as you, because you never know what lessons you can learn. And of course, from then on, people used to come to the coffee shop just to talk to me about the Nobel Peace Prize and take pictures with me. And of course, when they came in, they would buy coffee, they would buy cakes, buy sandwiches, all that kind of stuff. So definitely one of
listen to your wife.
Yeah, highlights of my career, of my life. Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's talk about that Nobel Peace Prize a little bit. How was that experience for you? How was getting awarded a Nobel Peace Prize? What were the feelings around it? Did you know beforehand? I know a little bit about how the decision making is done, but not that much.
Yeah.
So walk us through a little bit through that.
Yeah, I mean, when we were actually awarded, a lot of staff did not even think that much about it, because we were just doing our job. And it was not the first year, I think, we were supposed to be shortlisted. I think the year before we were actually shortlisted. Okay. And I remember our boss back then, Mohammed El-Barada, was saying that when they were announcing it on CNN, he just thought, oh, they're never going to give it to us. So I think he even said he even missed it. Actually, I think he actually got up to make a cup of coffee or something. I can't remember. And I think his wife screamed, and he was like, what's happening? Ran into the room and was like, guess what? You got your staff and you won the Nobel Peace Prize. So what happened is that they actually called a conference for all staff to come into a big conference room and, made the official announcement, because some people did not know that much about it. It was actually in the middle of the day. So people were at their desks working, and then they were like, oh, there's an emergency town hall meeting, so everybody went there and they made a big announcement. Everybody was like cheering and were like, wow, great, and cheering on and stuff like that. And then, of course, my boss and there's a couple of other people just went to get the official nomination in Oslo. And I think I didn't think that much about it. In fact, till today, my sister always tells me, if you didn't even tell me you won the Nobel Peace Prize for about 2 or 3 years, I just didn't think that much about it. I'll be honest with you. I just thought, okay, we were doing our work and we got recognized, and that's fantastic, and that's great. And I told her I didn't frame it till 2010 or 2011 actually. So it was just like in a massive envelope. And I remember my boss coming and basically handing it to me and shaking my hand and taking a photo up for it, because he went around the department and handed it to the staff as well. So
it's a very humble approach to it.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that I also mentioned is that the Nobel Prize actually comes with a $1 million prize money, and I was in a way lucky to benefit from that. We talked about Zambia's cancer hospital earlier on. So about 20% of that money, $200,000, was actually given personally to one of my projects. And my main project was actually to create the first cancer hospital in Zambia. So I actually benefited directly from the Nobel Prize money as well, which is fantastic. And that money was used to train specialist doctors, for example, oncologists, the doctors that deal with radiotherapy. So some of that money was actually used to train some of the specialist doctors that would eventually be involved in opening the first cancer hospital in Zambia, which was opened by the then president in July 2007.
See, for me, that's one good reason for you to get a second Nobel Peace Prize.
Let's see.
How did Zambia react to that, though? As a country, as a government, what was the reaction that the people got?
I think they didn't think that much about it because they just thought, okay, the IEA is helping them, and they didn't actually know the source of the money for that. I mean, it was, of course, the project to establish Zambia's first cancer hospital was a lot bigger than that. It's roughly, I think the final figure was roughly about $10 million. But of course, what a key element of that is the training of staff, because you can buy all the fancy equipment in the world, but if you don't have anybody to operate it, then it's basically a useless investment. So I was really fighting to get a lot of money to train the doctors, because without the trained specialist staff, then nothing's going to happen. You're just going to have a nice hospital that's empty with untalented people monitoring it. So I mean, now of course they know that some of that money came to, of course they're ecstatic. So I'm still in touch with some of them, actually, some of the doctors that were trained on that project. Yeah.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Was it a career risk you think ended up paying off? And if so, out of all the career risks you've taken, from government policy in London to nuclear science in Vienna to
Yeah.
even the coffee shop, which one sort of shaped you the most?
I think I like to start from the beginning. So I think that maybe just starting off in the British government, just after my masters, I didn't really think that much about it. I basically applied for a job that I was overqualified for, which was fine, but I was very intrigued by international development anyway. But at least that gave me the backbone and the strength, I think, and confidence to apply to the UN. Because I'll be honest with you, I haven't told many people this, but when I actually applied to the UN, it was basically 2 grades up from my job in the British government. I remember my boss in the British government saying to me, "Are you sure you want to apply for this? It's going to be a really tough job for you." I said, "Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained." So in the British government, they basically have a grade level of what it equates to in the UN, and it was basically roughly 2 grades up. So I was basically like an advisor, an assistant in the British government. And the first position that I got in the UN was basically like a manager, basically, of countries. So it was basically two grades up. So I think that was a big career risk, obviously. And of course, after I joined the UN in 2002, and then 3 years later, we were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. So I think from then on, then that obviously opened a lot of doors. And I'm sure definitely we would not be talking now if I wasn't awarded a Nobel Peace Prize with my colleagues, 20 years ago already. Yeah, 20 years ago already. So I think from that was a bit of a big risk. People were saying, "Oh, why are you leaving England? You should stay here." And my wife was like, "Oh, we've got 2 kids. What we're gonna do?" And I said, "Well, the only thing I can think of is let me try applying for a job in the UN. It's obviously it'd be a little bit more different. We'd be in a different country, but I think then it'll be a bit more in tune with what I wanted to do. So I think that was probably the risk, and that really paid off for all the different things that have come since then. Actually, yeah,
How was
it's
the
definitely
experience?
opened doors to me. Yeah, like even when I was headhunted to work at a think tank in Saudi Arabia,
Mm.
about 4 years ago, I even asked them, I challenged them, I said, "Why do you want to hire me?" And they said to me, "Because you've got a Nobel Peace Prize." I was like, okay.
Well, it is a brand name maker.
Yes. Yeah.
How was the experience at the UN? Because there's a lot of people, myself included, that have been
Yeah.
applying to the UN for the past decade or so. So,
Yeah.
how's that as an experience?
I think, I mean, at one point I even did like a short presentation on how to apply for jobs in the UN, actually, with an ex-colleague. We did a workshop about 5 years ago, actually. Yeah, when I first moved to Dubai in 2020. I think that there is definitely a lot of changes happening in the UN at the moment. One of the things they look at a lot is experience, and the reason why they look at experience is not because someone that's 25 years as opposed to 30 years. In fact, I was one of the youngest people to join the UN in my grade. I joined when I was 30, just before I was 31, actually. Yeah. And all my colleagues were like, the colleague that was next immediate senior to me was already like 34, and everybody was like in their 40s or 50s when I joined. But I think that the reason why they look at experience a lot is that sometimes you're put into situations where you have to handle difficult conversations, and I think with experience that gives you the tact how to handle that conversation. And I think I got a lot of that working in international diplomacy and development, working in the British government, because that's it. Because when you're representing the UN or even the British government, you're not representing yourself. I'm not representing Lameen Abdul-Malik. You're not representing Alex. You're representing the whole organization. So if you say something wrong, it's not, oh, Alex said this. It's like
British government.
the government, yeah, the Greek government said this, right? Or the UN said this, and so they look at that kind of like, the experience. And I think also having that kind of, I think the personality plays a lot. So if you ever get to an interview, and I'll definitely be more than happy to, after the session, if you want to have like a 30-minute chat on, some of the nuances of applying for the UN, not a guarantee, but at least to understand like what the process is like, even to understand even the job description, why are they asking certain questions, right? So, example, like it's when you work, and even when I was working in the UN, I was towards the end. A lot of my ex-colleagues used to call me to the interview process because they just wanted my opinion, and I like to think they valued me. So I would even be on the interview panel for doctors, for example, oncologists, medical physicists, all kind of, not in my technical skill, but my part of the interview was looking at that kind of person's personality, if that it will fit with the organization. For example, I wouldn't answer technical questions, but just like looking at their character trait. How would this person, would it be easy for them to take criticism? Would it be easy for them to be patient with countries? Because you're dealing with countries, and if you upset a country, they just have to pick up the phone. The ambassador just calls someone, or minister calls and says, who is this person that said this to us? And then, of course, then all hell breaks loose. So, you have to really be very tactful about how you manage those kind of conversations.
All right. Okay, that's interesting. It's good to know. Let me shift a little bit into Africa, right? Yeah. First cancer hospital, right? What's the hardest part of turning a project like that from concept to reality?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different expectations. So, I always tell people this: when you design a project, you can design a perfect project on paper. It's not that difficult. I did that for 15 years, working with multiple of countries, across all kind of different aspects. I designed projects in healthcare, in food security, in safety, in water. I think, people think, oh, I've got the perfect project, we're going to close it in 2 years. It's not about that. The most important component of a project is a human being. You're dealing with human beings, and human beings, whether AI likes to tell you or not, are not predictable. They're the most unpredictable things on the planet. So I think the most important thing is managing expectations and managing people when it comes to anything, when you're working on a project. So, anything that involves that, you have to be very tactful. You have to think about how you can convince people that this is in their best interest, for example, and you have money that you have to be allocated. So you have the pressure from the UN, of course, because the UN gets money from governments, and governments then have to report back to their taxpayers and say, we gave, I don't know, 5 or 10 million to this organization, and this is what they're using the money for. And then we have this constant reporting. You have to report back, oh, I did a project for Zambia to open up their cancer hospital. So you can report back to, other countries and say, yeah, the money you gave saved lives. So, oh, great. We gave money to the UN, IAEA, and they did this. They created a project in Zambia, and it saves 2,000 people's lives a year. Then, of course, countries are happy about that. Of course, when it doesn't go right, then that's the issue, right? So I think it's managing people and expectations is really, really important. And I think those are the things that you would find will take a lot of your time.
I assume, and this is from my experience with Africa, that that part of the world is a little bit harder to manage expectations than the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm slightly biased towards Africa. I think there's no easy, I wouldn't say there's any easy continent. I think it's just understanding the continent. So a lot of Africans really, especially people I was working with, they were like directors, researchers. So they're already high achievers. They're like, they're professors. Some of them are professors. Some of them have been to Harvard. Some of them have been to Oxford, to Cambridge. The challenge that they have is that the environment does not support them. So once you get people that are really, really keen, they really want to have an achievement, that's excellent, because when you have someone that has the right mindset, then any product can go really, really far. So of course, there are definitely different challenges. And of course, when you design a project based on the book, for a country, especially in Africa, it doesn't work like the book. So I think, you know, even when you look at my job description when I was working there, was like one of the things they will ask you, one of the skills they will ask you is able to challenge procedures and achieve results, right? What does that mean? It basically means that, yes, we know there's a textbook, but the most important thing you're going to be judged on is achieving results.
Can you adapt it into Africa, basically?
Yes. So you have to find a way to achieve results. Like I remember, you know, what I mentioned earlier on in terms of reporting back to governments. So if Spain or France or Greece give money to the UN, they don't want to hear, oh, they had challenges, their water system broke, their lab, someone broke into their lab and stole all the equipment. They're not interested in that. They're interested, we gave you money, did you create impact? That's the bottom line, right? So I think one of the things is, you know, understanding different people's cultures, understanding their mindsets. I think when you focus a lot more on that and building relationships, then I find in my experience that things will move a lot faster.
Staying on Africa, I mean, you gave some of your own personal funds into this project you did, but let's assume tomorrow you wake up a billionaire or a millionaire, right? And you have 100 million to improve Africa's healthcare system. How would you go about doing that? Like, to me, it sounds hellish because it seems like there's a lot of things to do, but how would you tackle it?
Yeah. Well, I always believe that when it comes to health, prevention is better than cure. I mean, most healthcare systems are based on when you're sick, you come into the hospital. And I always think, well, why aren't we tackling before people are sick? So a lot of the diseases that overwhelm a lot of African hospitals, sometimes they're curable. So if you look at things, even cancer, like basic cancer diagnosis, screening, stuff like that. And if you look at things like TB, you know, before the COVID pandemic, TB was the number one killer in the world. It kills one person, I think, every 4 seconds. Well, so roughly 1.4 million people a year die from TB.
Really?
Yes. And that's not just in Africa, of course, it's in Asia as well. And I always say this as an anecdote, and I always say officially for a reason. So officially, if you look at the statistics during the pandemic, the more people were dying in India and China from TB than COVID. Okay. Officially, and I'm saying officially for a reason. Yeah. And that shows you that that's a bigger problem. That was a bigger problem during the pandemic for them than COVID. Because TB is highly contagious. If I had TB and I was in a room and I coughed, everybody in that room will get TB. So, you know, going back to your point, if I had 100 million, what I would try and do is invest in technologies that bring down the time for diagnosing people, because when people get diagnosed later, that's when it becomes fatal and becomes overwhelming for health systems. So one of my first papers when I was working at the think tank in Saudi was actually the need for a TB vaccine. I did that paper with consultation with Bill and Melinda Gates, and also published that paper there's a UN Vaccine Institute in Korea. So I published that paper, and the idea was like, you know, the TB vaccine we have was created in, I think, 1918. That's over 100 years ago, right? With all our new technology, no one's developed a vaccine for TB. And I think that that TB vaccine that's given, like, you know, when you're a child in Africa or Asia, it's mandatory, but it only lasts for 5 to 10 years. So if you get TB when you're 15, then
you're done.
The vaccine's not going to cure you. So I was looking into that, and there was some people already developing like technology in that area. And it wasn't even that much. It was going to be like a few 100,000 just to do some research and then do some more test trials and then basically disseminate that to the world. So I look at things like TB. HIV is still prominent, but, you know, HIV gets a lot of research funding. I'll give you another statistics. So TB kills 1.4 million people a year. HIV kills about 800,000 people a year.
Right.
HIV gets about $800 million a year in research. TB gets about 65 million. Now, those statistics are based on 2021 when I did my last research paper. So TB kills more, but gets 10% less funding than HIV.
Do you think that's because HIV has a better brand name in terms of marketing as a disease rather than TB?
Well, maybe I don't want to. Maybe because it's more prominent in other parts of the world that have money than not, probably, sadly. So what I would look at is technologies that can look at prevention much earlier on, for example. So that would release the burden a lot of teachers. Sorry, a lot of doctors being overwhelmed, like in hospitals in Africa. If you go to some of the hospitals in Africa, there's basically people just all around the hospitals because when people travel to be cured, they have to go with their family, sometimes their whole family. And that could also be dangerous because if someone has an infectious disease, the whole family goes there, then everybody gets infected, right? So the whole family goes for one person and gets infected. So I'll look at investing definitely in technologies that look at prevention mechanisms, for example, and also I think looking at maybe some kind of self-diagnosis. And one of the things that I was looking at as well was looking at maybe leveraging technology like maybe drones to get basic medication to difficult, hard to access areas, especially some villages that don't have proper roads. Sometimes someone might travel like 2 days to the hospital and all they needed was like I don't know, Panadol, for example. And they've spent so much time and they've lost a lot of earnings because when they're not working for 2 days, they're losing money. So it basically cascades all the way down. So basically, I think I would look a lot at infectious diseases. So what we call traditionally communicable diseases, basically the diseases that can spread faster. Non-communicable diseases are beginning to get more prominent. In fact, they're beginning to kill almost more people. What I mean by non-communicable diseases, things like cancer, obesity, diabetes. These diseases are actually killing more than infectious diseases. Even in Africa already, globally, cancer kills more than infectious diseases, but in Africa already, cancer kills more people than HIV, malaria, and TB together already.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah. So, one of the things about investing is looking at people to do with lifestyles. I was really shocked because I'm doing a lot of stuff in research and health that nobody still in this day and age has done a human physiology study in the world that basically maps out people's physiology. What I mean by that is their DNA, their race, so the most optimal food systems for them. And I was listening to a podcast. I listened to a lot of health podcasts, and that question came up, and the guy was like, "Nobody's done that because the people only do it based on their environment or their country." So yeah, maybe they've done a study on a certain segment of the population, let's say in America, but globally, it's of no interest to the big funders. So if I could do a study like that, because that would inform at least for a lot of people what is the most optimal thing. We found out during when COVID pandemic happened, like why weren't a lot of Africans dying? Because their physiology obviously had something different that some people were like, a little bit cynical, saying, well, they've already had HIV, malaria, TB. So COVID was like, okay,
Is nothing. Yeah.
is this it? Is this the best you've got? That's just a very like crude rendering of it. But so what was it that they had in the environment or in their DNA that prevented that? And if there's, if maybe there's a lesson learned from that maybe the next pandemic hits, that at least we've done some kind of study on that can say, okay, how can we help the rest of the world not suffer from this again? But something like that.
That's very interesting. I would think that leaders globally would look into that idea and potentially start implementing something of that sort. You never know when the pandemic might come, and you don't know the impact it could have. So it's very strange for me that you mentioned that it exists as a proof of concept, but nobody's trying to implement it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, also one of the things that I also learned, because when I was at the FII, the institute in Saudi, what I loved about that job was I was able to put all the ideas I've been thinking about for years onto paper because I was the head of the think tank part. And so one of the things that I did is I had a panel where I invited a lot of top experts in the world in my panel. And one of the things that one of the guys said is that they already know the amount of diseases or the viruses, I think, that exist in the world. Something like 20 virus families. They already have the data for, I think, 3 or 4 sets. They need about $5 billion to develop vaccines and preventive mechanisms for the rest. So if another pandemic comes, they can say, oh, this is this virus, here's the vaccine. But they were still $2 or $3 billion short. You would think that, the pandemic, I think, cost the world like $5 trillion. So 3 billion is like
Nothing.
It's nothing really to say, okay, the next pandemic is going to come. They're already picking the next pandemic is probably going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years because of the different factors. So you think that people would invest in
I don't want to poke
technology.
the bear, but why do you think it is they're not investing into it?
I
And you
think
can be
sometimes
as politically correct as you like. It's fine.
I think sometimes people focus a lot more on this concept of ROI, return on investment.
Mm.
Um, and I think sometimes, sadly, with human beings, we're very, very, very short-sighted. Um, a lot
Isn't
of people
health
like
the ultimate ROI though?
exactly. How can you, I went to a conference last year. I was invited to a conference last year in Rwanda. Um, it was a health conference talking about, health in Africa, stuff like that. And the week before that, they just had, I think it was COP29. And, someone in the conference said, I can't believe people are complaining about a COP29 about, they didn't get enough, I don't know, hundreds of billions for climate change. And it said, if they gave the same amount of money or even a fraction of that to fight health, most of the health problems in the world will be solved. Don't get me wrong, climate change is important. I've done a lot of research on that, but I always believe the most important thing is human health, because without human health, you can't do anything. I always say, even the richest person in the world, if he has a headache or diarrhea, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
He's basically out of office. Basically, a basic bug that you can't even see with your eye can basically, sometimes can even kill you. So you think, oh yeah, there's this, want to invest 1 trillion in AI, 1 trillion in this. Yeah, it's nice, but invest $1 trillion in AI of health so that everybody can have at least the equal opportunities to be a lot more productive, and there'll be a lot more money around. A lot of people, like, if they're sick, they can't go out into the economy, they can't generate wealth for their family, they can't buy anything. But if you sort out health, which is the basic thing that every human being should have, then everything will be, well, as we say in economics, everything else given will be a lot better, I think. So I think this concept of ROI, people are very short-sighted. People have already forgotten about the pandemic. It was only 3 years ago, some countries were still making us wear masks. Just invest in those technologies, invest in those vaccines. So next time it happens, we can deal with it. Instead of 2 years, we could probably deal with it like in 4 or 5 months.
Mm.
Done. But people say, "Oh, ROI," but I'm like, is it going to take how many years? Can I wait for the next pandemic to make money on this? You probably can. Next pandemic, if you did it now, you'd become a billionaire instantly because everybody would be running
What?
after you to get the vaccine.
What?
Yeah.
Let me shift a little bit because you mentioned drones and technology, et cetera, et cetera. And you've been an early advocate for AI in public health.
Okay.
Um, how do you think technology can help in all of this?
Yeah, well, I always talk about the concept of AI being assisted intelligence. So the concept is basically assisting humans or augmenting us, for example, to do things better. It's like you have an assistant. Is there an assistant that you can help you do something much faster? For example, leverage that technology to understand things better. Like we talked earlier on about diseases. For example, I met a company last year at a health conference in Dubai where they managed to find a faster way to diagnose TB. In fact, they're on their way to India. I haven't been able to keep in contact with them, and I wish I had their contacts. But they basically were bringing down the diagnosis time for TB from, let's say, 3 or 4 days sometimes to literally minutes, right? So you can cure a lot of people. You can give them the right treatment because that if they've got TB, for example, you can say, okay, within minutes. Because what happens a lot in these countries is that you tell them to come and have a check. They have a check. If they have TB, you can't find them. They've got to go back to their village or their city, and they're working. And they're not going to come back and make a journey back to say, oh, by the way, you've got TB, take this medication. So, how we can leverage AI for things like that. Even with cancer, for example, there are already some studies being done about, understanding types of cancers, for example. So there's more optimal ways of treating that, more optimal ways of looking at for signs initially. A lot of this stuff, a lot of diseases are basically just catching the sign too late. And when it's too late, then of course it becomes a problem. But if you catch these things much earlier on, where you're looking at obesity or you're looking at cancer or you're looking at infectious diseases like malaria, TB, HIV, for example, then you can inform people much, much earlier on. Now, there's also AI going into concepts of blood analysis. So, for example, if you go for a health check, you have someone takes your blood. There's so many different things you can assess from the blood, for example. So you can say, okay, maybe in a 5 or 10 years time, you might have this particular disease. So we can compute this and say, maybe you need to change your lifestyle now. I'm reading a fascinating book by a guy called Peter Attia called Outlive. He's one of the global experts on longevity. And a lot of stuff he talks about in the books that even when they do autopsies in America on 16-year-olds, maybe sadly they were in a drive-by, they could already see from their arteries that this person in the next 5 to 10 years is going to have heart disease. That's a 16-year-old. So why
Wow.
wait till they're 40 years old when it's too late? You can just start doing this at 16 years old or 15, because obviously they've been eating something. Their lifestyle has already had such a huge impact that already having clogged arteries at 16 years old, let alone at 50, when it'd be a lot more difficult to fight it.
Bloody hell. It just seems to me that with all this info and data, the ROI is pretty high. I mean, both in terms of health, so conceptually, and also profitability, companies could
Yeah.
be very profitable if they took these actions. It's just weird that they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I know some companies are looking at it, but I think there's still a lot of gaps from what I've just my basic research. And I'm not a health practitioner, but just like reading some books and stuff like that. I'm just thinking, why is anybody doing this? Like really basic stuff, like what you eat, what you should avoid eating. And of course, the industries that's pushing some of these things obviously have billions at their disposal, but they can still make the same amount of money by pushing alternatives as well, right? So if you give people if you say cut down on this particular thing, if not you'll be fined, then they will react to that. There's a sad story basically going back to even the concept of seatbelts in cars. So the story goes that in a lot of road accidents before seatbelts were mandatory, and people ask the car industry, "Oh, is there a way we can stop this?" And they're like, "Yeah, maybe if we put seatbelts." Like, why don't you put seatbelts? Like, well, it's not a regulation, so why are we going to do it?
Are we gonna do it? Yeah, fair.
Yeah. Until all governments in the world said it's mandatory, it has to be in the car. And then, of course, after that, you say, okay, if you're not wearing a seatbelt, we're going to fine you heavily. Then people are like, okay, I'll put the seatbelt on.
It just seems to me like you've been ahead of the curve with many things, and it's just interesting to see that the market is not responding the same way, though in some parts it might slightly have started to. One of those examples to me is what you've done with green hydrogen, right? So you've been pushing for it.
Yeah.
I'm shifting a little bit from healthcare, but I see
Yeah.
some parallels into it. So
Yeah.
what's green hydrogen for you, and how do you see it being the most realistic path to make it commercially viable in emerging markets?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a little bit similar in terms of what's happening with healthcare. So there was a big thing about 2 years ago, and I actually wrote a paper on how Morocco can actually leverage green hydrogen to help with its development. And the reason why I focused on Morocco, I was doing some work with a university there, but also secondly, there was a big study that was done on I think 5 or 6 countries that can really become green hydrogen superpowers. They were the United States, Chile, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. And the reason why those 5 countries were chosen is because not just to do with solar energy, but also wind. So to produce green hydrogen, ideally green, basically using natural resources, is you need to have a lot of solar power and you have to have wind power of a certain strength. So those 5 countries are actually leveraged. And if you look at Chile, Chile is obvious. It has the longest coastline in the world. So they have a lot of wind power, for example. And those 5 countries were selected. And of course, like 2 years ago, there's a big thing about renewable energy. So I looked into that as well. And, I did a little bit of study, as I mentioned to you, in Morocco. And the idea was like, the EU has already said that they need, I can't remember the figures now, they need a lot of hydrogen, but they can only produce half. And the other half has to be imported. Of course, Morocco is by far the closest of those countries to Europe. And the idea is basically how to leverage, transporting it through different technologies into Europe. Now, again, what's happened now, there's been a little bit of a slow growth in that, obviously to do with politics, some countries pulling out of their commitments to renewable energy. And it goes back to the concept of ROI, right? So even when I was looking at it, I remember an ex-colleague was talking about the ROI doesn't make any sense. It makes sense. People are pulling out of it because some of the companies, especially in Europe, were saying, well, it's a technology that's probably going to be start reaping benefits in about 5 to 10 years time. So why am I going to invest in this technology now? I don't see any benefit. But it's like, why aren't you doing it now? And this guy had access to some CEOs of some of the top European companies that would be producing what we call electrolyzers. So electrolyzers are basically the equipment that you use for leveraging basically water and wind, and then it goes through a process that produces green hydrogen. We already have what we call dirty hydrogen, basically, which is already produced using fossil fuel. So you can produce what I think gray hydrogen using fossil fuel. Yeah. And in terms of the benefits of hydrogen, obviously it's one of the lightest gases in the world, and of course, so the science says it's a great way to power the future of energy. But of course, the investors are like, oh well, let me wait for another 5 to 10 years for this. But the thing is that sorry, go on, Alex.
Go ahead. I'll ask you after.
I was going to say, well, some countries, especially like countries like China, are actually moving ahead. There was in a famous report where I think one of the prominent manufacturers of green hydrogen last year just went on a tour to China, and he said, there's no point investing in green hydrogen in Europe anymore. These guys are way ahead of us. The most optimal way for us is just to import it from them. Just import it from China. Basically, they're so far ahead. Apparently, the guy was said he went on a study tour in China. So that look at that concept of the manufacturing industry, and it's going to change the whole global economics, because some parts of Europe are just waiting for things to be easier before they get in, whereas you have other parts of the world that are like, well, let's think about the next 10, 15, 20 years. What's going to happen?
I'm glad I waited to ask the question. What about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Because I remember a project with a consultancy back in my days that was working on converting some of their plants into green hydrogen plants.
Yeah.
So they seem to me like they're ahead of the curve, and the UAE and the KSA in general seem to be ahead of the curve in many things. But where do they stand when it comes to hydrogen and alternate resources?
Yeah, so I mean, even in Dubai, there's I think it's MBR. Can't remember the name. Energy Park. It's a $13.5 project, and the idea is that I think before the end of this decade, that 70 or 80% of Dubai's energy alone will be renewable energy. So that project started a long time ago with Siemens Energy, actually. So that's in the pipeline. And then of course with Saudi Arabia, it makes a lot of sense because they're one of the largest users of desalination plants. So basically, desalination plants are basically where you take water from the sea and you basically create energy, and it's very expensive. So even though yes, they have oil and stuff like that, but desalination plants are very expensive. So they're also thinking about the future, how they can leverage, natural gifts like the sun and the wind, and that will cut down and make energy, more affordable, basically, because the process, obviously, at the moment, when people start costing green hydrogen, they say, oh yeah, it still costs more than fossil fuels. But are you going to wait for the next 50 years where, for example, the price of oil begins to get higher? And in fact, that was my thesis at university. My thesis at university was OPEC and its pricing policy, and basically studies back then would say the next 100 to 200. Some people debate this because basically fossil fuels are finite, so they're going to run out sometime, right? So what are we doing now before we run out of things? And we go back to the concept of AI. We now know that data centers are going to use so much water and so much energy that you can't just rely just on fossil fuel for that, because you need to also look at your population. You can't just say, okay, well, by the way, the data centers that are going to provide some data on you are taking so much energy, so we're going to have power cuts for the next 4 or 5 hours. So,
well, look. This is why I like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, because they're being very realistic about their plans. But I remember another project that wasn't Middle East, well, UAE and KSA oriented, that was actually looking at reducing the cost of space exploration so that they can go into space and retract sources from potentially comets and stuff like that and bring them back to the Earth, which is a very ambitious plan. But it sounds to me that creating green hydrogen locally is slightly more achievable than going out into space and bringing those resources in.
Exactly. Yeah, you would. I think definitely it's better. Right? Because for some countries it's like a no-brainer. You can even do like even some countries in Africa are looking at it. So like exactly, once you have solar, you have wind. Even there's even been cases where I think Germany achieved it once when they had one of these hot summers and a bit of wind, where I think there was a day where I think most of the grid system in Germany was just renewable energy. Obviously, it's not sustainable for the whole 365 days in the year, but it was like, oh wow, we used most of our grid this today was renewable energy. We didn't use fossil fuel. We didn't have to, you know, burn any oil or burn any gas. It came mainly from the sun, and they harvest the energy of the sun. They find a way to store it and release it during parts of the day. So there is so there is an experience that has happened. So there is a case study where it is possible for it to happen. And I think it's the same thing we talked about the pandemic. People are waiting and saying, "What's the ROI? Oh, I'm going to wait. Oh, it's too long. Maybe in 5 or 10 years I'll get involved." But for some parts of the world, they have no choice. They really need to look at this because, especially if we go into this kind of AI world which uses so much energy to run things. We already know from when you're looking at Bitcoin takes a lot of energy to produce. So if you're looking at AI and data centers, they use a lot of water, use a lot of energy. So how are we going to plan for this in the future? And I always think, the concept of future proof, plan today for tomorrow. Why are you waiting for something to happen before you react? We definitely have all the studies and all the means to be proactive. So.
I don't know. If I was an investor, it would kind of make sense for me because even if you factor in, for example, climate change and 5, 10 years down the line, the KSA or Chile does not have the optimal weather for harvesting any form of resource, you could take that know-how and go somewhere else where it would have that potential optimal weather and just utilize it there. So the ROI there would be potentially even higher than what it would be locally. So I don't understand how investors think about it. I just think there's too much money going around and not a lot of smart thinking.
Yeah, yes, I think so. I'm with you on that. Yes. I don't know how some investors think. I think sometimes there's this concept of trending. So people are investing. They invest in AI, but they're looking at large language models. They're looking at obviously generative AI. But what drives that? What's behind that, right? It's like maybe another anecdote for you. Someone asked me who is the largest user of tires in the world or rubber in the world, or one of the largest anyway. Maybe you can Google afterwards. And apparently it's Lego, right? And I said Lego. I said yeah, because all the little car Legos they make, they use proper tires and rubber for those. So it's like and they're multi-billion-dollar industry. They have to buy tires for their car for their.
I did not know that.
So, I mean, check it out. Because I remember someone was asking me, quizzing me, and I checked it out, and I was like, I'm shocked. So there's always something behind, like yeah, you got AIs, but what's powering AI? It's energy. What do you need? You need clean. It's not, you can't even use dirty water for it. You need clean water. So it's like, how are you going to get clean water if you're in a part of the world where it hardly rains? Then and you have rivers. Then you need desalination plants if you're in this part of the world. Okay, how much does it cost for desalination plants? How are we going to get water that's clean? How can you leverage solar energy and wind energy, for example? Or now there's been looking at tidal energy. Tidal energy is to do with waves. So how can we leverage that energy to produce and make sure that our population is still happy and have access to obviously energy? And energy is meaning the main thing for everything, right? Even before healthcare, we talk about health. Hospitals need energy. Energy is the most important thing to start off with anything. You need energy now in our world. You need it for everything. To eat, to drink healthy water, you need energy. To go onto the internet, you need energy. To read a book, sometimes you need energy in the night, so unless you read it in the day out, if you're lucky and it's not raining or it's not cloudy. So energy is like, and I think that's one area that I think investors should be looking at.
Let me pause this conversation because this could go for ages.
Yeah.
Let me move into another subsegment, right? So let me focus a little bit on diplomacy, right? So you've advised governments and think tanks on nuclear science, energy, sustainability. Your view, are global climate goals achievable without deeper cooperation between emerging economies and the West, or middle economies and the West? So KSA, UAE would be prime examples of that.
Yeah. Good. I mean, I think that the thread of this conversation is quite relevant. We're talking about the concept of ROI,
Yeah.
and I think it goes back to that concept. It cuts across everything, even international development, right? The SDGs we're on at the moment, SDGs, they've already been a report that I think they're way behind. It's only 5 years left. The SDGs are to 2030. And why are we failing on that? Again, it's not about money. I don't think it's about money. I've worked in international development for so many years, and I've seen a lot of money get wasted. It's about the right mindset and cooperation.
Do you
I
think it's
mean,
also a crisis in management?
yeah, exactly. And I think also, I go to this concept of, you know, I did call my company in the UAE honest management. And I think being honest about what is really important for you. So you're talking about developing countries, they're not progressing, but we know deep down that, yeah, if you really wanted to help them, then it's not that difficult. There's so many studies done by economists about tweet this, tweet that, then it's done. But there's not enough money flowing into that. Again, it goes back to the concept of ROI. What's in it for me? Many years ago, we had the Asian crisis, Asian financial crisis, and a lot of
Mhm.
the IMF, World Bank, they leveraged like billions of dollars basically to try and save these economies. And Africans were like, if you gave us like half of that, our problem is sorted. But they're forgetting one thing, because who were buying the stuff? Who's buying it? Who was buying the stuff in the West, in the global North? It was the Asians.
Yeah.
So you've got to basically feed the people who are going to buy from you, right? So of course there was billions going to save the Asian economies. Yes, they went in there and they also did some suspicious things about buying assets for like that, basically for
Yeah,
almost free.
naturally.
Yeah, but the idea is like, if you don't save your customers, then it's gonna cascade down. It's like a domino effect, right? So, when we look at international development, why aren't we giving a bit more money to help developing countries, whether it's in Asia and Africa as well, or in Latin America, for example? It all goes back to like, if I give this, what's in it for me? I think that's the concept of like this, where we've moved in the world. Sadly, I think people are getting a little bit more selfish, a bit more nationalistic. If you look at different
Mhm.
economies, different political regimes, people is like, no, no, me. What's best for my electorate? What's best for me? It's not done globally. And we even saw that again going back to the pandemic. And I always just say it's called a pandemic for a reason. It means that it transcends borders. Why are you trying to deal with a pandemic at a country level? It's pointless. It's not going to work. You have to have international cooperation to solve the problem. So I think, in terms of leveraging this concept of global cooperation, on the one hand, I think that's important. But I also think that, even for some countries or some regions, they also have to think about, okay, stop looking at handouts. What can we do within our economies that can help us move forward? We've already seen a little bit of an example in that. I don't know if you know about Ghana. So apparently, the Ghana currency is the best performing currency so far this year against the dollar. I think at the
I did
beginning of
not
the
know that.
yeah, at the beginning of the year, I think it was like 20 CDs to a dollar. Now it's 10. Now, one of the things that apparently the current president has done is that there were some things that, again, the economics, they were like, if you do A, B, C, D, and F, then the economy get better. So he was like, oh, is that it? He did it. One of the things is he centralized gold. So, for example, gold,
Yeah.
Ghana's name as the Gold Coast. So now all gold trading, for example, goes through the government. So even if you're a gold trader, we sell the gold to the government. The government basically sells the gold globally, and then they make money from that. So it's centralized, and that's helped the currency a lot. He's done some other things I've heard about, especially with the banking system, and that builds confidence. Again, it goes back to the concept of like everything you're dealing with human beings. If human beings feel confident in their leader and their environment, then they're willing to go that extra mile to do certain things. They just need confidence, and they need their leaders to be honest with them. They say, okay, fine. If you're being honest, you're leading us. Then I'll give extra 100% for you, and I'll do more. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically.
It's interesting to hear that what management needs globally and the whole economy basically relies on honesty.
Yes.
Is that one political reality you wish more business leaders knew or understood, or even political leaders? What's one reality you wish they knew other than that one that honestly drives everything?
I mean, I think it goes back to the concept of, I like the concept of leadership, and that came from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, a leader is a servant of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, every leader should understand that, you're actually serving the people. And that's why, even, what is a civil servant? Who's the highest civil servant in the country? It's basically the president. It means you are the servant of the people that you're governing. So that means, what do the people want and how can you serve them? Don't serve yourself, don't serve your family, don't serve your self-interest, don't serve the people who gave you money to get to your campaign. Serve the people. And I think just going back to that concept. So there's a lot of talk now about servant leadership, but putting that, I think I wish people would have that concept more in terms of
I don't want to
service.
get too political, but I think that's a concept that's predominant mostly in the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think the West has forgotten about that value. Also, me living in Greece and seeing it in Greece, I would definitely say that leadership here has completely lost that value.
Yeah. Well, I got the book from this guy. Is it Vanis? I can't remember his name in Greek. I don't want to. The guy that did this book, what I would teach my daughter about economics. He was I don't know. I can't remember his name. I think he was the economics minister during that time. Greece had this big economic downturn in Greece, where basically the EU were basically trying
Varoufakis,
to.
Yannis
Yes,
Varoufakis.
yes.
Yeah.
He had some really good points. Of course, it didn't last, but I thought some of the stuff. I mean, from what I read, I mean, I always, what you read is different. You have to speak to people who actually living in the country, they're experiencing it. That's the main source you should also get information from. So,
I mean, it was a very sound theory, and it was based a lot on game theory, but it wasn't a
game
particular
theory.
good point in time for us to experiment around with the economy. There's no right or wrong answer. That's my feeling about it. I see it as a holistic perspective that it's what we meant, what you said, that leadership has completely forgotten that they're civil servants, that they serve
Yeah,
people. Seems more like leadership serving themselves, and this goes across the board in the political scale in
yeah,
Greece, and I would extend it to the West as a whole.
yeah. So I mean, maybe it sounds idealistic, but that's what comes to my mind a lot. I mean, I always like to talk about the concepts of what they call the four virtues of
Mm.
courage, wisdom, justice, temperance, which were what most economies for centuries were built on. But now, sadly, we've gone into a concept of a value-based system
Yeah.
where what's valuable for you is not valuable for me. But if we talk about justice, wisdom, honesty, and I say, okay, well, this is not right. We know it's not right. So let's agree that this is not right. Whereas it's like, oh well, I don't care if it's not right. It's not valuable to me. So it's valuable for me to lie to you and to cheat to you. Whereas in a virtue-based system, it's not right. So and you can see that you can play that up and cascade it into politics now, right? So I think one of the there's a kind of concept when I was looking at ancient economies, for example, even going back to like the Roman and Greek Empire. I'm not saying it was
You believe
perfect.
in universal ethics.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So that concept, I think, would be a good starting point. But I think now we've moved into so much into this concept of the individual being championed, individual rights being championed across everything. So what is best for the individual, even though it hurts society, and that's what's championed, sadly. But I think that's sad. But maybe we'll disagree with me. But
I agree. I agree. I'm not too sure about the whole universal ethics thing, though. What is ethical to me might not be ethical to someone else.
yeah,
Uh, so I do have some questions into it. I wish it existed, but I see. For example, the concept of marriage is very different than the way we were raised into the way the Middle East operates on it, or Asian societies
yeah,
operate it. So universal ethics. I want to adopt your mentality, but I really, really can't.
yeah. No, I mean, like talking about stuff like that concept of being respectful. There's always middle ground, right? But when
Yeah.
it goes towards to one extreme or towards another extreme, then I think that's when the issues happen. And I think also this concept of understanding that people have different cultures, and not being respectful of that, and that's when problems start. So it's like, okay, there are some universal principles around cultures, um, that I think that could be championed again. I mean, this virtue-based system came from, from centuries. It's not
I,
something that
I
exists.
like your use of virtue because for me, universal virtue is better than universal ethics.
Yeah, yes. Universal virtue. So like, I always say maybe people like that exist in the world. Like if you look at just the word of truth, I don't know who loves being lied to. Um, I think,
Big
that,
discussion.
sorry?
It's a big discussion.
Yeah, yes. But usually people don't like being lied to. Even a con man doesn't being like being lied to. He doesn't mind doing the lying, but he wants to make sure that whatever he's getting from someone else is
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 not a
a
lie.
is exactly right. Even though they're gonna con you with something, like if they're gonna con you with, I don't know, a fake bag, they want to make sure that you're sending them the fake bag. Is it $10? It's not worth 1 cent. So do you understand the
Yeah,
trajectory?
I understand it. I
Yeah.
understand.
So it's like, they still want to have some kind of truth somewhere in the whole process. They don't want to be like just base their whole life on lies, even though they might be the one that would lie to someone to get a deal, right? Um, so that's just that concept. I think like that the
This
concept of justice. I think justice is really important. Like having just rulers and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's a good analogy. I would recommend you actually deep dive a little bit and publish something on philosophy as well.
Like one of my friends called me the intellectual philanthropist because I'm always giving away a lot of stuff for free. So let's see. I thought about writing a book based on my thoughts on what I've shared on LinkedIn over the last 5 years. I've actually got all the data. I just have to think of a title for the book and publish it. So that,
The intellectual philanthropist sounds like a very good title to me.
okay, okay, all right. So I'll have one tick across your name as the
Yes,
as
sir. Yes, sir.
proof of concept.
Lameen, we're getting a little bit on time, so let me ask my couple of questions that are unrelated to all of this, right? So
Sure.
my first one is, what's the best coffee you've ever had and where?
So when I had my cafe in Cape Town, um, back in 2010, 2012, I have to come. I think this is still one of my best experiences. There's a famous coffee farm in Panama called Hacienda La Esmeralda. It's a famous family. I think they're originally German, but they moved to Panama like many years ago. And back then, the most expensive coffee was one of their single origins. And someone came to my cafe and said, "Oh, you got to taste this coffee," and it completely blew my mind because it actually tasted like Earl Grey, like the bergamot. I don't even know what Earl Grey tastes like, so it tasted a bit like that, and it was an experience that still lingers in my mind. So basically, I brewed it in my own cafe. I had some really exceptional coffee since then, where I haven't actually paid for the most delicious coffees. Someone's actually either given it to me, or I've been to a cafe and they've wanted to showcase some of their best coffees and like, oh yeah, try this out. What do you think? I had a coffee that tastes a bit like jackfruit about 4 years ago in a roastery in Dubai. That was quite memorable as well. I had an espresso blend, but I think it was what we call tampered with a little bit in coffee. So I tasted like coconut pineapple cheesecake.
Oh,
That was
wow.
yeah, that was a very interesting experience. Yes.
I thought you were going to throw something like Kopi Luwak at me or something like of that sort,
No,
but
I've had kopi luwak once. I think one of my ex-colleagues, they went to Indonesia and they brought it back. And what is happening when I worked in the UN, every Friday when everybody was not too busy, I try and have this Friday mornings. So I basically brew coffee for all my colleagues, send an email out and say, fresh, coffee, let me brew some coffee, come to my room and get some free coffee. So this guy brought kopi luwak once. It was okay. Didn't taste like fantastic. I always say you can get a really good Kenyan coffee for like a fraction of the price of kopi luwak that will beat it on. Because the most important thing is when it comes to food and coffee is taste, right? And if it tastes better and it costs like £5 or $5 compared to something that costs like 300, then the taste is the most important thing, I think.
what about those new mushroom coffees that I'm experimenting with lately?
I haven't tried those yet. I have to confess. So I think it's supposed to have some kind of health benefits, but I haven't tried those yet.
I've started experimenting with those. I really like them, to be honest.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I used to be an espresso man, so for me, they're very interesting because they do have that espresso sense, but they're a little bit different.
Yeah, because I know in Greece you prefer like strong black coffee. I think
Yeah.
in Greece that's the dominant. Yeah.
And I think my final question to you is if you could go back and give yourself, your 25-year-old self, one piece of advice, or, for those listening to you, and they're still young in age and they want to go out there and try the world, what would be one piece of advice you would give them?
Um, I think at 25, what was I at 25? I'd already met my future wife at 25. I got married at 26. I think sometimes we try and overthink too many things, try and overthink too many variables. And I'll say definitely if you're 25 years old, just start. I always have this quote. I say you can never win the race unless you start the race, right? So if I think about at 25, got this job that was not didn't even require me to have an MBA at the British government. Then I kind of worked my way up. People trusted me, sent me out on trips across the world to represent the British government. I never thought that would happen. I never thought I'd win a Nobel Prize. If someone asked me that, I'd be like, that's never going to happen, right? But just taking that first step, you never know what door might open.
Mm.
So I think a lot of young people nowadays are scared of trying different things. Everybody, because of social media and stuff like that, there's a lot of pressure that everything you do has to be right from day one. But the world is not like that. Yeah, the world is not like that, and the world will never be like that,
No.
right? And in fact, it's even getting tougher. I think about my kids. They're around. Yeah, our daughter's 25, our son's 23. I think just start, just try different things. You can give up after one day, or 1 week. You could work in a coffee shop, for example, you don't like it. Try it for a little bit. I mean, go through some kind of little bit of a pain, because sometimes the pain might give you a little bit of story, might weather you a little bit. You might make different people, but human beings are still what we call human beings function better when they're with other human beings.
Yeah.
So even when I gave a talk earlier on this year about AI in education, I said the thing about AI education is that it was never ignored that we learn better in a group than individually, and that's proven, right? So we're social human beings. We need to interact with different people. So my advice in summary is just try it out. Just if an opportunity comes your way, don't say no. As long as it's something that's legal, obviously. Um, just try. I never know what might happen, and it's how you build your experience. You build life. Our life. If you look at how long we're here, we're not here that long, and I think the more you put into it, the more you're getting out of it. Try different parts of the world. There's so much richness in the world. I've never been to Asia. I might go to Asia in about 10 days' time. I've never been to Latin America. I've been to Greece a long time ago, 1987. We went for a family holiday to Crete. Um, but definitely, yeah. I think just try. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it.
Good advice. Good advice.
Yes.
I'm trying to. I've reached that conclusion myself and trying to implement it, but it's good advice.
But no, I'm inspired by you as well, because my friend has been asking me for the last 2 years to do a podcast, and I've been like, oh no, podcast. So,
Yeah, I
and you
was very
started
pushy there. I was doing my best.
it. Yeah, so you started it. So good
I
on
think you
you.
should do more. I mean, there's a lot of things you could give out to the world. It sounds like
Yeah,
the
I pray so.
intellectual philosopher.
God willing, I'll be able to. Yeah, I still want to do a lot more things, and I'm just hoping that I think I have to like stop waiting on people and just try and be a bit more assertive. So some of the lessons from my 25-year-old, I'm still trying to implement them, even at 53.
Cool, fantastic, Lameen. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for this. It was beautiful and insightful, and I hope it has an impact out there. And I sincerely hope and wish you all the best.
Yes, definitely, Alex. Thanks a lot for inviting me on your podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.